Hello and welcome to Patch Live Event 2. We're very excited to be here, and I'm sure you're looking forward to hearing from Adrian Utley and Ed O'Brien shortly. I'd just like to point you towards the chat. Please say hello to each other and to us. We'll have a chance to ask a few questions later, so feel free to jot them in the chat box and our producers will make sure we get to see them. Patch is a safe and happy place, so please be kind to each other and polite. But above all, enjoy yourself, immerse yourself, and we're going to be right back in just one moment with Ed and Adrian. If you have any technical issues during the session, please let us know by messaging the help desk in the messages so the team can respond to you directly. Hello, Adrian and Ed.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi.
Very nice to have you with us. Thank you for joining us.
That was really nerve-wracking, that countdown. I didn't like that.
Yeah, we maybe ought to devise a slightly more nerve-wracking bit of music to go with it.
Yeah, I think so. Violins.
I almost feel like we could continue our conversation about guitar strings. I just for those of you who've just joined us, just before, both Adrian and Ed were commenting about not replacing their guitar strings often. I thought, as a sort of a semi-guitarist, that was just me being lazy, but it would appear I like the tone of old strings, but then when you put new strings on, you go, "Oh, that's quite nice."
Sounds great.
Yeah, it's a funny thing, isn't it? I think it's funny that we've all bonded about that, because there are quite a lot of guitar players who like to change their strings all the time and get a brighter sound. And it depends what kind of music you're going to make, I guess. You know, for me, it was like when I got a new guitar tech, he said, "Strings new every day," and I said, "No, you're never going to be able. You're never going to have to do that. Yeah. Not in all the tours we ever do. I'll probably keep those strings on for years."
Well, Huey always tells the story of you guys, of him having to almost quietly change the tapes in the Space Echoes because Jeff did not want new tapes in the Space Echoes, did he?
No. I think there's something saying something. We're all a bit hanging on to the old, clinging on. No, I don't want any change.
And it's also, as you get older, I think you get so. I definitely, I'm like, I shy away from top end. I'm like, oh no, it's a bit exciting for me.
Yeah.
As we get older, we're losing the top end in our hearing. I'm exactly the same. When I'm making music now, nearly all the time, I find myself rolling top end off all the time. Yet everyone's telling me that as a man in his 50s, I've not got any top end left.
Well,
it's funny. Yeah.
It's really funny. I heard on the radio this morning, T-Rex, Get It On, you know, classic track. And it's so warm. There's so little, you know, there's no top end on it. And you hear it in contrast to everything else, and you go, oh yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It's part of its joy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's quite hard to get the balance between not having way too much treble. I mean, I found the way of doing it is to keep my strings old, and they, you know, and they sound great, and flat wounds as well. I use flat wounds, light gauge flat wounds on some of my guitars.
Yeah.
Because it's just, I don't know. I guess I always think of things like early Pink Floyd, you know, with Syd Barrett. The sound of his guitar is super dead, probably because he couldn't be asked to change the strings himself. And they sound really old, and they've got no sustain. But then I'm also into Jimi Hendrix, who must have changed his strings quite a lot, having ripped them all off the guitar.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You find your way, don't you?
Yeah.
You do. But I also, interesting that you're talking about T-Rex. I don't know about you, but when occasionally, if I'm on a streaming platform and I hear or listening to digital radio and I hear a newly remastered version of an old track, I heard a Bowie track the other day, and to my ears it sounded horrendous. It was all the top end was wrong. And the old records, it's like the famous story of Fleetwood Mac when they were recording Rumours, that they had the drums, they lost all the top end off the drums because they were rolling the tape so many times to record. I love the sound. I love the sound of stuff that got that warmth, and yet so much modern music, because there's so much top end information. It can be quite fatiguing.
Well, I think it's interesting, is in terms of sound, in terms of current music. I think to me, it's like a mirror of the culture. And I'm specifically talking about the pop side of it. To me, it's very Love Island. Do you know what I mean? I have this thing about, like, I think a lot of culture, and I'm not judging it. I'm just saying how I think it sounds. A lot of culture and a lot of sound it's like the Koreanization of culture. And do you know, by that, I mean, do you know that, that composite material that's been in vogue last 15, Korean, which is, I think it's been made, but it's used in kitchens and floors, and it's very white. It's very easy to clean, and it's got a lot of straight edges, and it's you know, and to me, that's what a lot of modern culture is, and music will always mirror that, because it's the soundtrack to our times, and it feels like it's like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really makes sense, actually, and I think that's a good kind of analogy. I think but music always moves on, and like you were saying, Tony, you know, we've all worked on 24-track. Probably not now; people don't use it so much, but 24-track, 16-track tape machines, and you do get this when you're endlessly working on a record. You do get this degradation of signal and bouncing things, but we don't get that with Pro Tools anymore. There's no we use plugins to try and get that degrading of sound. So it's possible to have everything really shiny. And I know some people I've worked with over the last year, their guitars are really trebly, like super, super trebly, and they love it. And actually, I loved it in the context of what we were doing. But I couldn't possibly use that sound. It's just too, and even like one of those whammy pedals just on with a weird, you know, the weird thing that they do. I know you use a whammy pedal, don't you? And it makes a kind of digital kind of edge to everything.
Yeah.
Which I would usually not like unless it was a really mad effect. But actually, I really liked it. It's the antithesis of everything that I do. But you know, in terms of pedals and stuff, but contextually and in this world that we're living in now, it sounds really cool, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, sorry, Tony.
No, go Ed.
No, I think that, I mean, with sound and everything, I think there are. It's funny you say that, Abe, because I feel like there are no rules, and much as I love darker, hairier tones, I also have if you hear a banging track, I think, what was that track that was a massive tune about 4 years ago? I sort of got obsessed about it, but it's everything about, it's all recorded in the box, you can tell. And it just sounded, I mean, it did sound synthetic, and that's normally stuff that I shy away from, but I was just like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Cola by Camel Fat.
I didn't hear
that track. I got obsessed with it, and it's of the moment, of the culture, but it's just like, you know, yeah, this sounds great as well. There are no rules. It's how we respond to it. And you know, my pedal board that I'm having built at the moment, I've actually got a Line 6 Helix going in there because I love that amalgam of old and new. And I'll front end and back end it with pedals, and I've got an EP3 preamp that will go on the back end of that, so it'll warm it up. But I've always loved taking that, like you're probably talking, that sort of extreme digital thing, and like combining it or putting it through an amp. That's what I always used to have those rack effects that in the 90s I loved. I had the first one that we got before we signed was this thing called the Yamaha FX500.
I think I remember.
It was a half unit. It was the shoe dive. It was a shoegazer sound. It was a Thames Valley box, as they call it. And preset 40 was called soft focus, and it was every chapter house, slow dive, ride. You know, you press it and go, oh, that's the sound. But what was interesting, and I had the one that I really loved was this Korg A2 that I had that came out in like '94, and I played that a lot on OK Computer and the Bends. But what was, if they were 12-bit, if you were a sound purist, you go, oh, this isn't, you know, it doesn't sound great. But putting it through an AC30 with some pedals, but it sounded, to my ears, it sounded great. So I'm really interested in that place. Like, I'm not a vintage purist. I love modern technology. And the thing that this Helix, what I'm going to be able to is hot swappable. Take out the pedal board, take it on a train, or not on a train because I've got the guitar, but take it places, plug some headphones in and make some really extreme sounds off, you know, when you're, you know, after supper or something in the sitting room, and then put it back into your pedal board and then mix it with a whammy pedal and, you know, an preamp. And I love that. I love that. That's where you find, for me, that's where you find new sounds, which is sort of like the holy grail, I guess. For me, it is for
I think that's the point, isn't it? There are no rules, and whatever you hear, whatever you're trying to achieve. Sometimes when I'm playing on other people's records, I'm trying to get the most shitty sound I possibly can, trebly, and sometimes my pickups can't get trebly enough, so you scrabble about trying to find a treble boost, or you EQ a load of. Or I've got a little amp there made by Audition, you know, Woolworths. I think it's got like a 4-inch speaker in it, and it rips your head off, but it's the most incredible sound, you know, when you record it. So you've got a beautiful AC30 on one side, and this absolute piece of shite on the other. But in the context of, you know, we all know that in the context of what you're doing, it's completely, it just works. Also, DI'd guitar. I'm really into DI'd guitar as well. Yeah, I would never have said that like 20 years ago, but actually I really like it. And I realized lots of people use that, and I didn't know that. But, you know, you find this stuff out, don't you?
Yeah, I agree. DI guitar I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah, and you know what, Ernie Isley from the Isley Brothers, all that fuzz, Big Muff fuzz stuff was straight into the board with a fuzz box.
Wow.
So it's right in your face, and there's no amp coloration or anything. It's just fuzz box whammy bar, you know, absolutely amazing.
There's that great, it's on my new pedal board. It's the JHS color box. Do you know that?
No, I don't.
It's the old Neve preamp, and it's basic. It's got a wicked EQ section on it and a gain section, and it's like, if you want a nice distorted guitar sound, it's not for you. But if you want to go and it's perfect. It's really, and it's based on the old. I'm going to shame myself here in a chat about gear and stuff. The old 1073 or 1083 Neve preamp.
Yeah.
That they all used to, you know, Revolution, Beatles. All of that. So yeah, they did that a lot, didn't they? And it's great.
I know. Actually, you're selling something called a broadcast, Tony.
Yes. You know, I've yet to try one because they go before we've even got any, and I've still not tried one. And they are. One. You've got one.
I got one on my last pedal board. Yes,
I'm dying to try one.
Ed.
Yeah, it's on my last pedal board.
I think they're absolutely brilliant. I completely love it. Yeah. It is that, isn't it? It's a cranked Neve kind of. It's a transformer that's breaking up.
Yeah,
I think it's great.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. So, what were you talking about?
So I think, just talking about small amps. I'm wanting to sort of move the computer around. This all the amps I've got, nearly, apart from my brother's old AC30 and a Leslie, are all small amps. And there's one particular one. I've had it for years, and it's got a fantastic tremolo, and it's the little Dubrek amp that came with stylophones. Have either of you got one of those?
No. I've got one of those. Yeah, they're really good. Yeah, that's the really trebly one, isn't it? You know, yeah. I had that before the Audition. They're really absolutely appalling, really. But in the context there, I've used it absolutely loads. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes.
Yeah, sorry.
No, after you, Adrian.
I was going to say, going on from what Ed was saying, I don't know that Line 6 box. Is it some kind of an amp modeler type thing?
Well, it's like all these things. It's got amp modeling in it, but I think you can dig. It's actually a really good amp modeler. I've yet to go there on amp modeling. I tend to bypass amp modeling and distortions, although gnarly fuzzes, like gnarly digital fuzzes, can sound brilliant. Obviously, I just kind of take the modulation and all the effects bits in the middle so it's got, for instance, it's got this thing on it. It's got harmonic delays, which I've never seen before. So you can set the key, and you can set scale, mixer, Lydian, and the delays ring out according, and it's bonkers. I mean, it becomes like I'm not very good with scales, but I play it in a kind of a mongrel way, and it just ends up sounding not like the guitar, which is always one part of what I'm always trying to do. But it's really cool. It's really I just think I think it's really interesting where some of the digital is going, because I think it is what you can do in that little thing. And of course you've got to I think as well, they're becoming, the people who are creating them and the algorithms and stuff like that, they're becoming more aware, and the sound is getting better, maybe because there's more, I don't know, the ones and zeros are being reduced or something. So the sound wave isn't that, although we all love 12-bit stuff. But what am I saying? I think it's, I guess it's basic back to that point. Never ever turn my nose up at stuff. I'm always curious as to what the latest stuff that's being released, and I'm always kind of blown away in a way. I always think, wow. I mean, if I'd had this 30 years ago and didn't have the choice of being able to call upon lots of pedals, I would, like I did back in the day with the A2 and the other stuff, and having probably 3 pedals for 3-4 years, you just dig really deep on your gear, and you get it to a point, you get those amp simulations. And actually, I know in those amp simulations, they just got, the trouble is now, isn't it? You've got so much choice and not enough time. But if you narrow that choice and you've got that time, I think they're amazing. I think you can make really original sounds, as long as you're not trying to go for that authentic, vintage sound, which that for me is not what's exciting. The vintage sound is just we're lucky enough to own the vintage gear. That's, I guess, the thing.
I agree. I was doing a session in France, and this isn't usually my world, but I got to do this session with these amazing players, and a guy called Dean Parks, who was he's part of the LA session scene. He's an older guy now. He's amazing. I mean, truly, truly amazing. He played with that. You think of a name, he's probably played with them. Steely Dan. You hear him all over Steely Dan. Incredible player. And I was watching him. I was just the weirdo there, because of doing the things that I do. I had a crunky old AC30 hooked up, and my pedals and bits of shit stuffed into the guitar. And he was always fascinated by what I was doing, and I was always fascinated by what he was doing. And what he was using with this little amp called a Kemper. I don't know if you've seen them. And because he's such a consummate session player, I was messing about trying to get a sound and go, can you put my guitar back in the headphones? Because the amp was about a mile away from me, and I couldn't really hear. And he had a Kemper, and he was just all chilled. Yeah. Turned it off, put his headphones on, messing about, got a sound, turned it up. It was amazing, And well, that is really cool, because when I first heard about that thing, I was thinking, oh no, amp modeling, digital, no, that sounds dreadful. But actually, he totally found what he needed from it, and it was brilliant and really quick.
Yeah, well, I know that Graham Coxon uses, the Line 6 guys told me he uses the thing that I've got live. He doesn't use his Marshalls and his pedal boards. He rocks up with this thing, and he's got you know, and he can take a DI if he wants. I mean, that's on his solo stuff. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. In fact, my guitar tech, Adam, he's been talking about the Kemper stuff for the last 4 years, and he goes, because he obviously does other gigs, and one of his gigs is Robbie Williams, and he does Guy Chambers, who plays guitar. And he said, like, the same thing. And he said, these things can take a profile. He said, what's amazing about it? And he's not doing a hard sell to me. He knows what I'm like. But he said, you know, you can also get, you can put in the sound of your favorite amps. You can record that and it'll profile it. You know, I mean, it's extraordinary stuff. What's going on at the moment like that. Yeah. I mean, and it's great that you're not like that, Aid. And we're not like that. I think it's really important because it can get, you know, there's nothing worse than people like us who've been doing it for a while and go like, oh, you know, it's like that cliche. It's not like back in our day, you know.
It's
so,
not.
yeah.
It's actually, but there is so much more to choose from, and whereas maybe 10 years ago you'd have said to us, oh, digital guitar amp modeling, it might not have been the thing, but now the quality of even the smallest stomp boxes now is absolutely mind blowing, and there is so much that's possible. I now you've got me going, well, that's the idea of having something that I can take away and just sit on the sofa while there's something being watched on telly, and I'm making a guitar sound or a synth sound. Yeah, I love that sort of thing.
I totally, and that's the beauty of digital, isn't it? That it's so portable. It's so and yeah, for me, it's like, okay, you have to wade through some stuff, and it's not maybe, you know, it's interesting. Last week I was in my studio, and I've been in a writing phase, and I haven't done a sound exploration phase, which is what you know, in Radiohead, my role has been, you know, sound. So I'd spend a lot of time spending on sound and finding sounds and all of that. When you're doing your own stuff, I'm thinking more about writing songs, you know, lyrics, what's melodies, top line melodies. So you have less time to do sound. So last week I was like, okay, I'm going to do some sound stuff. And I was pulling pedals off the shelf, and it's amazing how when you get great pedals. So, for instance, do you remember they went out of business last year? Unfortunately, did you ever come across Diamond pedals, Tony?
Yes, but I've never tried one.
They were a company in Canada, really, really great, and they had this delay called a Memory Lane 2. And it was the first tap tempo analog delay. And it was supposed to be the same chips as the Memory Man and stuff like that. I plugged it in and it was just like, oh my God. You know, that thing when you instantly with a piece of gear. So, you know, you don't quite get that you have to work harder almost at some of the digital stuff, I think. But the work that you do going down, you know, going down alleyways that are least well trodden on it, I think they can be very rewarding. You know,
I agree. I'm naturally quite lazy, so I like things where I can just see the knobs and move them and get a sound. And it's the Chase Bliss pedals I can find almost overwhelming. For a start, they're quite small, but there's so much going on in those tiny little pedals. Yet if you, as you were saying about harking back to when you only had one or two pedals, to have something like that at your disposal, where you could probably, I think with something like a Chase Bliss blooper, you could probably make a whole album just with that pedal and a guitar. And it would be, but I don't really, I have to admit to not having the patience for something like that. I need something that's a bit simpler to operate.
Yeah, no, and I know what you mean. And that's that Eno had a thing, apparently, someone was telling me, was that when he took on a new piece of gear, so for instance, when he took on the DX7, he was like, he went deep. So the DX7, when the DX7 came out, he not only went in deep, he learned how to write FM, is it FM synthesis, the coding?
Yes.
So he went super deep, and Flood actually told me this. He said he spent a year going in so that, you know, he's lifting the bonnet on it, going like, I'm going to get really in there. And Eno had this thing that when you buy a piece of equipment, and he did the same thing with the H3000, the Eventide H3000. You have to factor in not only the cost of it, but in the amount of time it takes you to master it or to get beyond the presets. And I think that's so true. And that's something that I wrestle with constantly, because I'm, you know, in the very fortunate position that, you know, if there is a piece of gear out there, I can buy it. And sometimes even people will give it, which is absolutely amazing as well. But what if you're not careful, you can end up with so much gear that you never get beyond the pre, you know, I say the presets because some of them don't have presets, but you know what I mean, figuratively speaking. The obvious.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that scenario of having too much gear and not actually enough time to really get to know it. We were talking about, well, actually, while you weren't with us, Adrian, we were talking about the dangers of having too much gear and not ever really becoming master of any one piece. And Ed was talking about, you know, going deep into the DX7 and the H3000.
I've got too much gear, but I do believe that actually, when it comes to it, I've got way too much. But when it comes to it, I've always got my favorites. Like my pedal board, I haven't changed it for years, other than one thing that you told me about, Ed. I think everything else on there is what I've had for 20 odd years. Actually, I just changed my Echo to the Memory Man.
How does it work for you?
Huh?
How does it work for you?
I absolutely, completely love it. I have no idea why I didn't have one before. You know, it's annoying because it's on my massive pedal board, my live one, and I can't get it off, so I have to get this massive thing out. You know, so now I'm going to end up buying another one, and then I've got way too much gear. Then
you need to do as I have and have 4 Memory Men.
I know that's. There you go.
And I think Flood's got 5.
Has he?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, well, yeah. It's funny. I'm in a phase. I'm actually, Tony, I'll be sending you an email soon about gear that I want to sell on. I'm actually getting to a stage whereby I'm trying to simplify, because I'm kind of doing that 5-year rule that if I haven't really used it in 5 years, I'm passing on. But I know I'll probably regret it, because I was just saying, whilst you off, Aid, I pulled this. I had a week with pedals last week.
Have you gone again?
Hello? Can you hear me?
I can still hear you, Ed.
You can't see me?
Yes, I can see you and hear you.
Okay. Age.
So,
okay.
You're flying.
And I pulled some pedals off. I pulled the Mooga Fuga off and a couple of Moog pedals, the big ones.
Yeah.
And did you ever come across diamond pedals?
No.
Okay. I'll say this: the price will go up on Reverb. If you can talk about a delay, if you can get the Diamond Memory Lane 2, they stop making it. It's a tap tempo. It's a tap tempo, first tap tempo analog delay. It's also got an EQ section. It was based on the Memory Man, and it's got this great modulation. It's amazing. And
is it Diamond
pedals. They actually sadly went out of business last year, which I was really gutted about. And I got this about 12 years ago, and it's not for live, because it's too mental, it's too temperamental. It's for the studio. It's so balanced, and if it can go into oscillation with if you breathe the wrong way.
Yeah.
And
dangerous live.
Yeah. Actually, it could be great for Portishead. Jeff might love it.
Just leave that on for half an hour.
I think Jeff would be very happy.
Okay. It's interesting because lots of people I talk to at the moment, and I think I said this last week, Tony, about I'm feeling a little smug about all of the gear that I have. It's really just because I've been doing it for so long, and I'm old now, and I've got so related stuff. And like Ed, I do get rid of stuff. If it's not working for me, I have to get rid of it.
I know you do, and I usually end up buying it because it's all this. You go, I've got one of those, and like, oh, I've always wanted to try one of those, and so I end up with all your gear, and
you've had some killer stuff off me. There's some great fuzzes and things, but but I think we're not alone. I think lots of people, because now laptops are really powerful, and you can make I use an Apollo interface, and I've got a few of them, and I use a little tiny duet, I think it is. And, I can do everything I need to do with some of my pedals and a few guitars and a laptop, really. I mean, I could rent a house somewhere, go there and write. Wouldn't need all this stuff looking at me for, freaking me out and demanding my attention, And also the maintenance of a lot of equipment is quite full on. Every time you switch it on, it doesn't work,
Yeah, that's what I've got to. And I've got to that point, like the maintenance of stuff. And it's like, I mean, I love, Tony, that Binson that I bought off you, I absolutely love. But
is it still running okay?
Yeah, I need to wipe its bottom every 2 days. It's great. It's absolutely no. That's not fair. Not every 2 days. I'm exaggerating.
No, they do need to be run.
Yeah, they do need to be run, and they do need to be cleaned. But they are amazing. They are amazing, and the mod you did on it is amazing, which alters the speed of the delay. So yeah, it's again, it's that balance. It's that balance. Yeah. It's what I love as well. I like passing on great gear. Because I've always had a thing against, do you remember, like in the last 30 years, vintage guitars have gone up massively in price. And it's because loads of people on Wall Street and financiers have bloody bought them and hung them on their walls. And they, there's that whole thing like a 59 Les Paul is a better investment than any stocks or shares you'll ever have,
Yeah,
I've always really, I think that's really sad. These instruments should be out being played by people and appreciated. And I remember the first time I got I might be selling it. I don't know yet, but I'm thinking of selling my 64 335, and only because I don't use it enough.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like want to pass it on, because when I got it, I was just like, this is the greatest guitar I've ever had. Now, of course, if I sell it now, I might regret it in 20 years' time. But again, that's a bit like, well, just live it. It's like making a decision old school making a decision when you're recording on 24 track. You made a decision, then you go, okay, I've got to make the decision now, rather than where you can nowadays with Pro Tools. Oh, well, I'll make that decision in the mix. It's like, okay, I'll make the decision now and sell on. So I'm really into like the idea of, and I think what's interesting in talking to younger musicians and people in studios, people in their 20s, they understand, and that they love, they understand the old gear. They understand what it can bring to their laptop recordings. They want this gear. So, it'd be great that, they can save up and buy one of these pieces of gear, and it'll color their work in a beautiful way.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not for hoarding. It's for if you're not any use to you anymore, pass it on to somebody else who will use it.
Yeah.
And we've all done that. That most of my vintage battered guitars, most of the guitars I own, none of them are pristine at all. They've either had the neck broken or the paint rubbed off them. And I love that. All my 30s guitars to 50s guitars, they've had a life. Someone's loved them. And I've got an old Gretsch from the 60s that is, the paints on the neck has all gone. The pickups are not originals. They're of the year that it was made, but they're not the ones that would be in it. So it didn't sell in this vintage shop because it wasn't an original. But all the people who worked in that shop, it was one of their favorite guitars. And I bought it and I tried it for ages, and it's awesome. And I think if you're not using it, pass it on to someone else, and they can make more music with it. We don't want these things on a wall or in my storeroom. I don't want it. Somebody else can take it. I often actually give stuff away if it's not incredibly valuable to somebody who makes something good with it. You know, I think it's useful to do that. You know. Also, I didn't pay a lot of my stuff. You know, I was getting it back in the day. If you think about what we, you know, 30 years ago, you pick up a synth like an SH-101. I think I paid 50 quid for my first, you know, SH-101. I mean, it was a lot then, and that's what we used on dummy. Actually, we didn't because I couldn't afford one. I borrowed my mates, but when I did get one, it was 50 quid. You know, but that's not possible anymore. So, you know, all these things I got, they didn't really cost me that much.
No, today getting good old vintage equipment now at a low price has become a bit tricky. But the thing is, if you're inventive and you kind of open your mind, there are all sorts of things that may not on the face of it look terribly exciting, but actually you can, like we were talking about the old 12-bit delay. And I mean, I've had to have a word with myself about delays quite some time ago. I used to have to keep pretty much an example of every delay that came my way. I think long before Soundgas, I think I had about 25 tape echoes in my studio, most of which didn't work.
Yeah, of course.
But I mean, Ed, what were those rack units you were talking about using in the early days?
They're brilliant. The Korg, I think all the Korg stuff was and we're talking about the early 90s. So it's they did the A3 and the A2, and then they did a double rack unit called an A1. Now they were 12-bit, but I loved the reverbs, the delays, the modulations on them were fantastic. And yeah, I mean, you're right, Tony, because if I was looking for, I'm sure that stuff is like available for about, you know, probably 80, 90 quid. But in terms of sounds, fantastic.
I kind of, that's what I try to look for now. I try to look for things that aren't fashionable. Actually, not so much for sounds, but actually just because I want to play with things that are different. And I'm actually looking at, there's an Akai half rack. It's an Akai half rack reverb. I found an old digital reverb. It probably 12-bit. It's got a reverse reverb setting. It's got pre-delay on it. It's absolutely insane. And I think it cost about 50 quid.
I was checking out the guitarist. I don't know what was the guitarist from the Verve called? Nick McCabe, was it?
Yeah.
Great sound, right?
Yeah.
And like I came across some footage of him the other day, and he was like just making these incredible. And he was using an Alesis half, you know, was it a quad reverb or something?
Yeah.
It sounded amazing. And I'm sure all the Kevin Shields stuff, My Bloody Valentine, you know, they would have been using that stuff as well.
Most probably.
So, you know,
I know. I think it is looking out for stuff and finding things that are interesting, rather than just going, you know, buying the 909 drum machine or the 59 Les Paul. You know, there's a lot of in between stuff that's really, and actually when you first start out, like you were talking about with your Korg stuff, you use what you've got and you find its limits, absolutely its limits, if it has any, and you push everything as far as you possibly can. I know we did that with dummy because we didn't have any equipment hardly, you know. All the drums went through my Fender amp, you know, because we didn't have amazing compressors, and you know, it was all like amateur level gear until we got into tracking, and then the studio was pretty good, but we probably didn't even know how to use that stuff. So you know,
I agree, we did for years. I mean, it wasn't until our fourth record, we didn't really, until Kid A, that was a time of expansion in terms of gear, but we were kind of like really thrifty on stuff, you know. We didn't want to spend stuff. And I mean, I remember on OK Computer, I maybe had 4 pedals and this Korg A2, and that was it. But with that Phase 45, the MXR and the Boss delay pedal and the Marshall Governor, and I think I had I can't remember what else, but that's what you work with. And then you work with it like you do, Aid, and like where we were inspired by Sonic Youth, where you hit it on the guitar, the source of the sound is that's also part of it, part of the sound. So you've maybe got about 5-6 different variables, but you explore all those parameters.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think there's a lot to be learnt from unconventional guitar players like Fred Frith or Derek Bailey, Sonic Youth, you know, Thurston and Lee Ronaldo and Kim. What they're doing, what they're looking at in that world is a sound from source. You know, a different way of looking at music, and I think this is why Dean, you know, was saying about that session with the Kemper. He's looking at me, kept coming over, going, "What the hell are you doing now?" As I was getting a fridge out of the kitchen to put on top of my guitar. So, you know, you know, so it is to expand. When I saw Fred Frith play in the 70s, I just couldn't believe what he was doing. It's such a fantastic sense of musicality in a different context and completely, some people would think utterly crazy, but actually sonically completely amazing, and very minimal amounts of, you know, equipment. There was a lot of kitchen utensils, but not too much amps and stuff, you know. And I think, yeah, I mean, keep your mind well and truly open for all things, I think.
It's sound. It's all about sound. I was talking to Flood about this the other night, and we were talking about where we're really excited is that idea of, you know, it is because what he's been working on, I'm sort of working on, is that idea of it's not just music. It's like, and in fact, his daughter's really is at film school, and she's kind of obsessed with sound. What's the word for it? Sound design.
Right. Yeah.
It's like sound design, and it is, and that, I think that's, you know, you're right, and to you can sometimes get a bit like that. I find you can sometimes get obsessive about the notes and the melodies or whatever, and then you just have to kind of throw the blinks off and you go, no, it's like, forget about that. Be as unmusical as you can to create noise that brings out, because too much melody or too much music can be really annoying in my you know.
I totally agree with you. I think that's what's liberating about, for me, was liberating about synthesizers, because I don't really play a keyboard very well. Yeah. So you've got this other world that you can explore, you know, which is not to do with, I mean, it can be to do with tonality and, you know, but I did learn my scales and all of that stuff, and I found it both useful and incredibly hampering, you know. Right. So I do actually like to just tune a guitar to something I don't know what it is, and then like Sonic Youth, and then you end up with something, you've made your guitar an alien to yourself, because you don't really know what you know, you've got to find stuff. And I think that's, all of these things are relevant. It's just, you know, keeping your ears open and your mind free, isn't it? You know, it can be just tuning can do it, I think.
Remaining open-minded and not necessarily going down the same route each time is a very powerful thing. And what you were saying, Ed, about I'm being chastised, but apparently we're supposed to have gone on to Q&A now. Gosh, we really bit. No. I was like, I don't want to interrupt this. It's fascinating. So we've had all sorts of questions coming. One, I think this might be, well, it could be for either one of you, but I suspect it might be from for you, Ed. Is it challenging to create, complete, and release music on your own after the safety net of a band and revered front people? That's from Tom and Beth. That could be for either of you, frankly.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think the really interesting thing about when you do stuff on your own for the first time, this is certainly what I realized on the last record, is you have to cover so much ground when you're sort of doing it yourself. Whereas a band, it's almost like you've got departments. That's his department. That's his department. That's what they do. And so what happens? So for instance, in Radiohead, like I was explaining at the beginning, was that my department was sound, and so I didn't have to worry about the lyrics. Didn't really have to worry about, I mean, I wrote my own parts and stuff like that, melodies and stuff like that. So it was melodies and sound, but it wasn't, I didn't have to worry about what a bass line or how the, you know, we would rehearse for some of the songs that Tom had written in full, but a lot of the time as well, especially in the earlier days, in the middle days, stuff was rehearsed. So as a band, you know, in a room, which is a very effective way of writing songs and pulling them together. So it's very, very different. Whether it's daunting, it's like anything, it's a challenge, and sometimes it feels quite overwhelming, but then other times you enjoy it because you're seeing your, you know, for me, it's, and this talk of all this gear, for me, the frontier at the moment is, the new frontier for me is singing and finding a voice. And I started on the, and I think you're always exposed. So as long as I'm constantly being challenged and I'm out my safety zone and out of that, I'm happy. And yes, it's very different from a band, but I wouldn't say a band is a safety net either. I'm sure.
No. Yeah, that's another conversation there, Ed.
Yeah, we've had conversations like this.
We spent, when I played on your record, we spent quite a few hours in the kitchen talking about life in a band, the ups and the downs and the joy and the safety net of it, and the, you know, it's a massive world, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It really is.
And it was so nice to be able to talk to you about that, because we always, it was funny because we always, and I just slightly digress, for us in that whole era of the 90s, you know, that whole Britpop thing, we were never a part of it, but we always felt much more closely aligned. We've always felt with you, Aid, Portishead and Massive Attack, West Country boys, we were halfway towards the West Country boys and girls. And so it was interesting, I think, and also the music that we make and the characters that we have in our bands, there's a lot of Portishead and Radiohead, there's a big crossover.
Yeah. Two heads of one. Yeah, I know. And that's really interesting. And I think that's what bands are like. They're you also find your other bands that are your kind of kindred spirits in many ways. You know, it's another massive subject that we could get into.
Yes, so that's the next one. So I think it was Frederick asked quite a long time ago. Most of the gear you're talking about is very expensive and impossible for most of us here. I think in fairness, we have mentioned a few new and lower priced bits of gear. So I'm actually going to, if you could recommend one piece of equipment, one pedal, one instrument under, let's say, £350 for someone to buy, what, or in that sort of price range, what would you say you've enjoyed recently?
A
the
guitar
Planetarium by Neon Egg.
A what?
The Planetarium pedal.
I've been waiting for one of those for about a year. He doesn't seem to have been able to make me one.
No, I haven't got one yet, but it's apparently in the post, and I am so excited.
I think I might have been upstage a few times, because he put me on the waiting list a year ago, and I know Peanut from Kaisers has got one, and it's a thing. I mean, I almost don't care how good it sounds, and he's told me it sounds amazing, because it's a thing of absolute beauty, isn't it? It's like a mini multicolored MS-20 with
and it sounds great, and that's the thing. And like, I'm not a massive reverb fan, but I can, it's like, I know, you know, I can even tell over the phone and the computer, it's like, yeah, this has got the sound. So yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Fantastic. And what about you, Adrian?
I think I mentioned last week, to go another way with the synthesizer, I really like the Arturia Micro Freak, I think it's called, with the touch keyboard. I think they're really cheap, and I think they're absolutely completely brilliant. I think you can get properly excellent sounds. They're only really small, and you can do so much with the touch keyboard to make very straight sounds or extremely. I didn't particularly like any of the presets, but I started making sounds very quickly with it. There's a few corners of complication, but generally I think it sounds fantastic. It's got digital oscillators, which is unlike most of my other synths, but a really nice analog filter, and they're cheap, and I think they're great, and you can put them in your rucksack and plug your headphones in, and you know.
That is the thing today. Yes, an SH101 that you were talking about earlier that you had for £50. You can't buy one of those unless you're very lucky. You're not going to find one for £50. But there's a certain company that I'd rather not name, but they make they make a recreation. they make a clone that's very inexpensive. So today's musicians might not be able to find so many vintage broken synthesizers that don't work properly, but they can actually find new clones or new synths. And of course, there's the whole modular thing, isn't there? I'm being prompted again. For either of you, I think we touched on this earlier about the process of finding and building a new sound. Because Ed, you were talking about how you found sounds, and I think Adrian, you said open your mind. There are no rules. So how the process of finding and building a new sound?
For me, it's very intuitive. It's just go what your gut feels, and it's almost like a. I think it's just like a don't use your head too much. I mean, you can, but I would just like go down a nice rabbit hole, and just I also think take things to extremes and then work your way back. You know, go to the far reaches and go and then work. Oh yeah, that moment where is this utter shite or is this beautiful?
It's gonna be a fine line.
Yeah, and it is a fine line, and that I think just a slightly sorry, Abe, but that thing is the essence of music as well. And I remember Johnny Marr said this to me years ago when I first got to know him. He said, Ed, never be scared to sound shit. And that's so true.
But it is quite difficult to do that. It is, especially if you have a reputation like you do, in order to cut through that sounding shit to finding a new ground. It's quite difficult. I find that. I especially find that in sessions, you know, you don't rock up and sound shit trying to find something. But actually, that's probably what you need to do sometimes.
Yeah, you know, Johnny said this. He said it was interesting because he said that I imagine that's exactly it, Aid. You turn up for a session, and you know we've got Adrian Utley, the guitar sonic meister, and Johnny said it used to be like that for him. So he said when he turned up, because he played on the last Talking Heads record, he told me this a few weeks ago, and he said he turns up and he said, I don't want to hear anything beforehand. Just put the tapes up. And he said, and he turned around to them. He said, listen, he said, I might sound really bad for the first 3 or 4 takes, but just trust me. I've got to, and I think that's brilliant. And to be able to have that, I'm not sure whether I have that that certainty. I think maybe as I get older, but to have that sort of certainty in your craft and your ability. But I think it's so important. And you know, it's I'm aware that I sound shit so much of the time.
We all do, man.
Yeah, we all do. Exactly. And I think that's what was brilliant about the Get Back sessions on the Beatles.
Amazing.
They don't sound very good. And that's any band when they start playing a bunch of songs.
I know. It's really important to know that, isn't it? Yeah.
It's very reassuring for those of us who aren't musicians who've sold records and have people wanting to see them play, that actually, I've talked to you about this, Adrian, just it's great. You know, you say, oh yeah, well I sound shit a lot of the time. It's like, oh thanks. I've been told we've got time for one more piece of question. I think this would be a nice one to wrap it up with. What this could be a long list, Adrian, particularly. Hi all. What are your desert island pieces of gear? So maybe let's try and condense it down to 1 or 2 essentials when you're making music. What are the? I mean, well, let's say that a guitar is a given, unless you wish to name check a particular guitar.
For me, what really desert island or just a minimal list of stuff. Well, I'd have to have an amp, and I'd have to have a guitar, and I'd have to have a couple of pedals. And as long as it was there was some kind of distortion, a wah-wah pedal, and an echo, any one of my guitars would do, something old, and a valve amp with a tremolo on it. I'd be happy. That would be my minimum. But I mean, if I was really on a desert island, I'd take my old Martin with me, and that'd be enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I echo you on that one. I definitely it would be an older guitar. It would probably be my Casino, my Epiphone Casino, or even I've actually been discovering the joys of, which I've never played before, of Les Pauls recently. I've got an amazing custom shop Les Paul from the 90s, and I'm just in Les Paul heaven. So yeah, a good distortion, probably like if I was to be, I'm going to name my distortion. It would be like that classic tone bender, Mark Bolan, David Gilmour 70s. And then if I could have an EP3 that didn't need any maintenance.
Yeah, I'm with that. I'm with that. They don't exist, Ed.
They don't exist. So we'd take the Memory Man, or I might take the Diamond Memory Lane 2.
Right.
Which have now become impossible. In the course of this evening, they have become impossible to find on Reverb at a sensible price.
I should have given the heads up.
You should have given me a heads up on that one. Well, thank you both very much. I can't believe that an hour has passed, and I'm to anyone who's asked a question that we've not been able to answer. We will. I hope by the miracle of modern technology, we will appear in the chat afterwards and answer more questions. But Ed, Adrian, thank you so much. I think we could have talked all night.
Most definitely.
Definitely. All morning, all night, and all morning.
Yes, all morning for those. So thank you very much. It only really comes to me to just say it's the end of today's event. Join us on the next one on the 30th of March. There will be a free ticket code flashing up on the screen shortly. There it is. Thank you very much for taking part. I know the chat has been pretty busy. I can't say I've been looking at it too much myself because I've been engaged in what's been talked about. And for those of you still with us who aren't on Reverb trying to buy some of those pedals, do stay in touch on social media and through our contact info below. Stay for a while and chat in the chat box. We'll be joining you in the chat. And if you have any questions, do get in touch. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.